Hey guys, how's it going? Michael Troy here. I am so excited for today's comic chat. Today we have with us the amazing, celebrated Zander Cannon, who has a rich career and history in comic books, has just launched his amazing new comic, Sleep from Image Comics, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So thank you so much for being here, Zander. How are you?
Absolutely. I'm doing great. I'm just, happy to be here. I mean, I'm here and then I'm happy to be here anyway.
Yeah, that's good. I'll apply. So we have a couple things in common. I know that you're a Gen Xer. You live in the Midwest. Are you from
Yeah.
Minnesota?
No, I grew up I grew up all over, but I mostly grew up in Cleveland.
Oh,
And
okay.
then I went to high school in Colorado and then out here.
Well, I am from Toledo, Ohio, so we
Okay.
also have that in common.
That's right.
So that is fun. Now, I have to admit that I have been I've known your name forever. I just so like how you're in and out of comics and stuff. Like I was never much
Totally.
into Alan Moore's like America's Best Comics, except for Tom Strong.
Right.
And so I didn't really read top 10. Keenly aware of your name and always associated it with Gene Ha. So I was thinking that your style was this like super detailed, like highly rendered sort of Gene Ha style. And then doing research for this, and after reading Sleep Number One, I realized it's quite different.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean it would stand to reason that it would be like Gene's stuff, but I mean in a way it was like we kind of had to come up from different points to sort of complement each other. Like when I was working on top 10, I was doing layouts, and so I was doing the roughs and sort of like figuring out where the word balloons go and get the storytelling all, going. And then, I always thought of Gene as being like a really uh like a high budget, movie director where it's like, don't put in those buildings in the background unless you really want to devote the time to it. You know what I mean? Like because Gene's stuff is so detailed that sort of like my little boxes in the background turned into like an all afternoon ordeal for him. And I think that has been pretty fruitful the times that we've worked together. That it's really fun to sort of take my aesthetic, which is a little bit cartoony or a little bit sillier, and then his aesthetic, which is very photorealistic, and there's an interesting hybrid that comes out of
I was going to say, obviously, it worked, right?
that.
So let's back up a little. What is your history with comics? When did your interest in comics start? I am assuming it must have been at an early age, like most people, or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I loved drawing as from an early age, but then comics, I didn't know much about comics because I just pick them up at the drugstore or whatever. My parents had no connection to it. My mom is an artist though, and so like I was always drawing, and then my neighbor sort of the two things happened at the same time. My neighbor got into comics. As in going to the comic book store and getting comics and getting a lot of, this is sort of mid 80s, when sort of Dark Knight and Watchmen were coming up, then there's a whole bunch of like great sort of black and white indies and Gru the Wanderer and that kind of stuff. And then also another thing happened, which was that my mom went on a trip or whatever, and she bought me a whole bunch of comics and I think her guiding principle was like non-violent ones, because that was the whole thing. I wasn't allowed to have war toys. I wasn't allowed to have violent comics. And so she got like this one called Ralph Snart Adventures, which is a sort of a Walter Mitty type of like this guy dreams his way into like all these genres. And then Flaming Carrot Comics, which is this completely absurdist superhero, almost not even really superheroes anymore, but like this sort of
but
absurdist parody.
Bob Burden, right?
Bob Burden, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, it was wild. And I mean, I remember reading it, and I think I read it like on vacation. So it was like I had four comics that I was reading, and that just blew my mind. It's the weirdest thing I'd ever read. So anyway, all that sort of stuff, and I was from that point on, I was really into indie comics and funny comics mostly, I guess.
So when when did that lead to like a desire to draw your own comics or a career in comics?
Well, I immediately started drawing comics. Like I did a bunch of mini comics when I was in middle school, and you can tell it's the '80s because it was called the Ninja Garbage Man, and because ninjas were everywhere. And then of course there's something
100.
funny, whatever. And yeah, and I was liberally ripping off every other comic that I'd ever read, that was really fun. It was fun, like I read a lot of mini comics like Cynical Man, which is done by Matt Fizel, that was like stick figure mini comic. And mine wasn't stick figures, but it was not much more than that. And so, but I used that to sort of figure out, oh, I got to use this kind of pen if I want to photocopy it, and I got to photocopy it in this way if I want to be able to cut it and staple it. And there's a lot of stuff that kind of came from that. I would even say like not even very creative stuff, but just sort of like the logistical problems of fi figuring out a mini comic that I was like, oh, I like this. There's something really cool about doing it all as one person. It felt really kind of fun in a way that like other forms of artistic stuff seemed forbidding. Like it seemed possible the way that film didn't.
Hmm. And so what was like your first work in comics, like uh,
Yeah.
after making your own mini comics and things like that?
So when I was in college, I did a comic strip for the school paper when they still had those Gen X,
Yes,
and
I did my high school newspaper.
right, right. Yeah, I was the editor of my high school newspaper. I did all the illustrations and all that stuff. But then in college, I did the comic strip, and it was really almost like I was just doing it as a tryout. So I was doing all these different genres and all this different adventure stuff, and like it was all gag stuff, but I was really trying to sort of show off different styles. And then this was in 1993 that this happened. So I sent a bunch of stuff off to a bunch of publishers. I mean, just like by reading the indicia on the inside front cover. And so I got a response back from New England Comics Press, and they were the people who did The Tick. It's a comic book store, but and they also have a publishing company. And so they were looking for somebody to do a spin-off from The Tick, which is called The Chainsaw Vigilante. And so they ended up hiring me to write, draw, and letter this comic. And you know everybody's first comic is a mixed bag, but I mean it was all right. Like there's some interesting stuff in there. I think I was also a little bit in over my head. And um but I did 3 issues and it was canceled. And then but it's like I had those 3 issues. I mean, that's a huge step up to having a bunch of photocopies. It's like I can have 3 issues of a comic book and I can just mail those out to people and say, I did this, what do you think? And so right after that, I got a job doing a comic called The Replacement God with slave labor graphics. SLG is what they're called now, and the imprint was called Amaze Inc. Um, for their genre stuff. And so I did an adventure, like it was a fantasy Lord of the Rings like adventure for them.
Familiar
And
with a lot of the stuff that you're talking about,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And so anyway, yeah, and so at that point, I was sort of, well, like, I did that for a couple of years and moved on to other things. I published it with Image. I also published, and then I started working with Top 10, with Gene at Top 10. And I was sort of establishing myself in the industry because I went to a million conventions and I was just, shaking hands and being friendly and that kind of stuff. So that was, at that point, I would, you have other problems, but at least you're sort of in the industry, right?
So I'm curious how how did that happen with Gene Ha, your working relationship with him? How did you start working on that?
Kind of haphazardly. I mean, he and I ran into each other at a convention, I think a local convention here in Minneapolis. But then we were at the same signing somewhere in, I think near Purdue University. So I'd gone down for that. And so there weren't really, when you sign in a store, sometimes a bunch of people show up and a lot of times they don't. And so you end up sitting there and just shooting the breeze with whoever you're there with. And so Gene and I really got to talking. And he, I don't know the timeline of it, but he was about to move up to the Twin Cities, coincidentally. And he had just gotten the job working on Top 10. I mean, this was all still when all those America's Best Comics were still at Wildstorm, Jim Lee's thing before Wildstorm was bought by DC, and so it was still a little bit small. Like it was kind of in the planning stages, and people were. But anyway, when he moved up there, he was moving there, and he was going to work with somebody else who I think he'd gone to art school with, who was going to be an assistant to him and do backgrounds, I think. And so he asked me if I wanted to do backgrounds, and I'm like, I don't know if I've got the Gene Ha juice for backgrounds. Like he's the way he does it, it's astonishing. And so what we worked on, I mean, there were a couple iterations, but basically it was like what we settled on is that I would do layouts, and sort of some pencils, and he would do a lot of the other pencils. And I mean, it was in his style. The idea was that it would be in his style. And so that's how it kind of shook out after a couple issues, is that I ended up doing layouts relatively quickly to keep us on track, and then he would do the more laborious sort of photorealist, you know, photorealistic artwork.
How
Um,
long did that working relationship continue?
for that was 12 issues, and so that was probably 99, and we you know we're working very fast, and so it was probably 99 to 2001 or 2002, probably early 2002. Um, and then that's when he did the 49ers, which is a standalone graphic novel, and then I did Smacks, which is a 5 issue miniseries about it as a spinoff from one of the characters from Top 10.
How
His
did
was a prequel. Yeah, sorry.
how did it get decided that you would pencil Smacks?
Path of Least Resistance, I think. It's like I'd already done the character, and you know, and I think Alan had a style of working, and I think that it came from 2000 AD and a lot of that stuff, where it's like his, you know, you've seen his scripts, or people have seen his scripts. They're sort of legendarily dense, and they're legendarily sort of like I wouldn't say dictatorial, but they dictate what is happening in everything. Like this, every panel is like, this is a shot past a clenched fist, seeing someone's face, you know, slightly upshot. You know, in the background is this, and this. I mean, it's very much. I have composed this visual sort of tableau that you just need to execute. And so I think that he he was kind of more about like, let's not waste 6 months casting about for another artist. Let's just work, you know, with this guy that we've got and who knows how to do it. So, um, you know, and I'd like to think also, oh yeah, I was delivering the goods. So,
Well, I obviously you were for one thing, and for another thing, yeah, I did want to talk a little bit about how intimidating or I don't know, just like how is it getting like so you're getting the plot before Gene and you're having to do all the layouts and then you just pass off the layouts to Gene with the script.
yeah, essentially. I mean, we get him at the same time, but I was the, you know, so he can kind of look at it and kind of go, oh, new character. Oh, all right, this is setting. I'm gonna sort of design some of this stuff, and we would go back and forth on like, well, what do you want this area to look like, and you know, so that I could sort of like have a sort of a sense for sort of the shape of it, and he could have a sense for like, oh, what's the detail, what's the sort of, you know, texture of this place and so forth. And so he yeah, and then I would kind of go in and I mean, obviously these scripts were sort of saying like it's 5 panels, this one's the big one, etc. It's, you know, and he Alan always did an excellent job of you know, not breaking the 180-degree rule and that sort of stuff. So, but I mean, there was a lot there to be done, and you know, when people kind of talk about like, oh, like Gene Ha did the artwork on the book, like, what did you do? And I mean, you know, I mean, most people don't say that, but I mean, when they kind of wonder what I did, because it looks a lot more like Gene than it does like me, I felt like what I brought to it was maybe making it more of making the storytelling style more sort of like matter of fact and more sort of day in the life stuff. I think that Gene, as much as Gene is a, you know, does this sort of like photorealistic style and this naturalistic style, he's very much a 90s comics artist too, where he's, you know, looking for those punches and, you know, the wide fisheye lens and stuff. And so I was the one sort of saying, cool your jets, Gene, you know, like let's just have this be a wide shot to establish the scene, close up, over the shoulder shot, two shot, you know, so that we could kind of feel like we're in this ordinary world that's populated by crazy things, and we're being presenting all this crazy stuff in a very matter of fact way, so you don't kind of feel like you're overwhelmed by it. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, and did Alan ever send you like sketches? Because I feel like that's part of his like working
uh,
process too, as an artist himself. Which you had mentioned that he doesn't break the 180-degree world, and sometimes I think that you know having a writer who is can think as an artist is so helpful. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think it's almost the secret behind so many sort of, you know, famous comic book writers. I mean, you know, Stan Lee of all people was an artist. I mean, so
Oh,
was Brian Bendis and you know, Ed Brubaker and Jeff
Grant
Parker
Grant
and yeah,
Morrison.
Grant Morrison. All these people know how to draw, and I think that even if you sort of like, oh, I'm not really kind of keeping pace with like the style, or you know, like, I mean, you've seen Alan Moore's drawings. They don't look like they would fit with any of the stuff that he's written.
Right.
But he at least kind of knows like how to stage a scene and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I honestly, I wish he had sent some of that stuff. I would have been really interested to see it, but I think he was just comfortable describing it in a way, and it's like, yeah, like I think that works out. I think that works out really well, you know.
In a way, and this is another question I had for you because it seems like in a way like you were doing the storyboards and Gene was like the cinematographer. If you had to put like a movie analog
Right.
to it, um, so have you done like did this lead to doing like layouts for more people, other layout work? Did you become like the layout guy because of that, or
I did kind of, and it was not on purpose. I kind of and I ended up, because I was relatively young. I was under 30 by the time I was sort of like doing all this stuff, and so I think I was a little bit out of my depth, and I felt like, and I think also, I'd been sort of like put into this position, but my art style is not what DC Comics is or was looking for. It's too cartoony, it's too silly, it's too idiosyncratic, and that's fine. And I, I'm okay with that, of course. But like, uh, what ended up happening is that I would sort of pitch a lot of stuff writing. Not much was coming back. Pitch a lot of stuff drawing, not much was coming back from that. But then when I would do layouts, all of a sudden they're like, "Oh yeah, you know what? Good job on this. Superboy's late this month. Can you do can you do some layouts for that?" And it's like, sure. Like that's in a way that's like it's great practice. It's kind of fun to be the person who's like coming in and saving the day. It's kind of fun to do, like um when you don't have to think about the script, you can just kind of take the script and kind of go, this it's okay, but let me just see what I can do with it. And then also like there's sort of like a method of stripping it all out, like where you kind of are like, let me distill this down to the simplest possible way, so that I'm not putting my idiosyncrasies into it, so that the final artist, can put their idiosyncrasies into it, because that's what we really want. Because I mean, I'm just there to speed up the process and make it clear and easy to read and all that. So I did end up doing a lot of stuff for Vertigo. I ended up doing a lot of stuff for sort of like here and there on DC books. I did some, just a couple months ago for a DC book, and yeah, it's fun. It's fun to be working for an audience of three.
I'm curious though because and obviously you don't have to specifically tell, and obviously somebody with your pedigree would probably get more, but it can't pay that great because
No, it doesn't pay that great. I mean, it pays all right, but it's one of those things where it's like you basically have to be doing
a lot of them.
four pages a day for a while before you kind of feel like, oh, this is worth it. But I don't know. I mean, you could do worse than to one, practice, two, like have a bunch of editors know your name, three, have a bunch of like artists know your name. Like I remember sort of doing layouts for Phil Jimenez one time. He was way behind. He was behind or something, and and I'm always a little nervous. I don't think it's like I'm not really the one making the decision to do this, but so I don't want to impose my will on anybody. But then I showed up at a comic convention. He sees me. He just comes over and gives me this huge hug because he's just like, "You saved me." You like, and I'm like, "Oh, that's all I ever needed to hear." Like
Yeah.
that like, I mean, one is Phil Jimenez. He's like one of the best to ever do it. So, um,
Well, I've been on both sides of it because I edited a big anthology and I wrote a lot of it. And a lot of the times I would do the layouts for the artists.
oh,
Just as
okay,
an
yeah,
artist myself, I always found it easier because, you kind of have to see whether it can work or not on the page. You know what I mean?
sure.
Um, and but I've also been like at a complete loss where I would love to have somebody like rescue me and like work from some of these layouts where sometimes you just can't see it. Sometimes like I can imagine like figuring out a page is like so hard. So that's
Oh.
definitely something great you bring. So why did you ever consider turning that into a well-paying like storyboards for movies kind of career? Like because
Oh,
a lot of, your colleagues and famous comic book artists and it hit it big and then just disappeared to go to Hollywood and make the real money.
I well, and it's like I don't want to do that.
I
Like
know
I mean,
because it's not
it's
comics. They always come back to comics.
well, and one of the things is like I was feeling pretty down, a little bit down for a while doing layouts, but I was working on a book at the same time called Heck, which was, it was not on any schedule. It wasn't on any, I didn't have a publisher for it. It was just sort of a book that I wanted to do. And it was just it's a sort of a pulp, like a supernatural pulp novel. And so it's nice to sort of be able to go like, all right, here's me knocking out a bunch of layouts kind of to other people's standards. And then on Monday, when nothing's ever due, I could spend all day working on my graphic novel, and I was working on it really fast. Like I was doing 6, 7, 8 pages in a day. They were small, they were like at print size, and so and so that was the thing that kind of saved me from sort of feeling like this was drudgery or this was not very rewarding or whatever. I mean, it's rewarding in a way, but after a while, you're like, it's kind of samey, you know. But yeah, no, I never really. I always wanted to do comics. I never wanted to do movies, other than it's neat to think about, but it's also like that just sounds like more money being risked on it means that my life gets more complicated and my deadlines get more certain, and my life becomes becomes super stressful, and that's the last thing I need.
And then another seemingly big thing on your resume is the Kaiju Max. How did that come about, and what's that about?
Well, let's see. I think I pitched that, in sort of like 2010 or thereabouts, and like, it was like this was Oni Press, and so at the time, sort of all the people that had been working there, they'd been working there for decades, and so I knew everybody. I mean, and it's like you've been in comics for a while. When you're in comics for a while, you get to know everybody one way or
Hmm.
the other, and so I think I originally had thought of it as a side project because I was also working on some other things, and then I talked to Ryan Brown, he does Lucky Devils right now. He also did a book called 8 Billion Genies with Image, and he and I were going to pitch this as a project to do together. So I was just going to write it, and he was going to do the art. And his art, if you know, is I wouldn't say realistic. I mean, because it's very sort of over the top and grotesque sometimes, but it's much more detailed. It feels much more sort of like vivid. And so anyway, he couldn't do it because I think he had a Kickstarter that worked out, and so he needed to fulfill all that, and he started doing other projects, and that worked out great for both of us because he went on to great things, and then they Oni was like, "Well, do you want to draw it?" I'm like, "Ah, gosh, not really." Like I was at a point where I was just like starting to really think about how long things took, and I was like, "I don't know if I can do this." And then I was like, "Well, let's think about it, like think about it in a realistic way, and then give it a try." And yeah, it's like I ended up, writing, drawing, lettering, and coloring. I had a color assistant, but yeah, like and of course, my art style, you've seen it, is very, very cartoony and very sort of not what you would expect for this book. But the nice thing was being a writer artist is you can kind of go like see what hits the page and then kind of adapt to it and sort of like kind of answer your own questions as you go and make it work really well. And I felt like because my art style is so sort of like candy colored and soft that I could kind of push the darker elements of the plot a little harder because it was a little bit more palatable that the artwork was. So I think that there were a lot of things that people wouldn't have tolerated if the artwork was different.
So, okay, so what were you working on before sleep?
After finishing Kaiju Max, I sort of took a year and a half where I was working on just like small projects because I just, this is a 7-year project that I was like, I can't jump right back into something like that again. It's too much strain. And so, I ended up doing a bunch of anthology stories. I did another project with Gene Ha, like a short story project with Gene Ha. For like a cryptid anthology. I did stuff for like a science fiction anthology. I also did a Rick and Morty story. I did some covers. And at this time, I was also working on. I had pitched Sleep or I made the pitch, I should say, and I was pitching it, and actually, I was pitching it around to a couple companies before I brought it to Image, and then. Yeah, and then so I was kind of like there. I was planning for new things, but then I was kind of doing small projects here and there. Man, it felt a lot like I was just taking a breath, for like
It's
for like 18 months.
it's funny because I'm lumping you in as a part of what I call uh the image revolution. Like I feel like there's like been like a sort of like a renaissance, like a lot of really great new titles coming out. And I definitely include you as part of that. But it's funny because it does seem you said you shopped it around first. Because it does seem like a better fit for like maybe Oni or uh SLG or something like that. But you know, but that said, like Image does like quite a wide variety of books. So how did you land at Image? And
Ryan Brown, again, he's sort of like in with them and sort of he was saying, like, oh, well, he knew that I was pitching this around and he said, well, you should take it to Image. And I thought, ah, well, you know, they don't want the likes of me, you know, thinking the same way you did, like, where it's like, well, it's kind of cartoony, it's kind of idiosyncratic. Image's stuff, I think, is really like, you know, is pretty wild, but it's also fairly within a certain range artistically. But I thought, well, you know, I know the Image deal. I worked with them already. I know, you know, I know how it works. I know that it's a, you know, I know that it's a good deal. I know that it's really good about like they don't take media rights. They don't, you know, they're very sort of straight. They deal with you pretty straight. So I liked that about it. And then, you know, and it's like he gave me an introduction to Eric Stevenson, who we had sort of like, you know, been like ships in the night. Like we've been doing comics for about the same amount of time. So
mhm.
it was kind of fun to talk to him and like kind of catch up. Like, well, where have you been? You know, like how have we not like, kind of run into each other more? But anyway, so that was
I know I find that often like sometimes you're just so peripheral with somebody that it just eventually lines up when it's supposed to or meant to, right?
yeah, right,
Yeah, and
exactly.
I have to say, like going into it, like I said, my only preconceived notion of you was thinking that you drew like Gene Ha, and then I was just like, Image has just been on fire. So I saw the title, loved the cover, uh, loved the logo, and thought I'd give it a chance, and I'm so glad I did. And it's so amazing, and kind of not at all what I was expecting, and it's so good because it's like this because you even mentioned that you weren't much of a horror fan in the I think the second
Yeah,
letters
yeah.
column that you previewed to me that you know you weren't allowed to watch like scary stuff and you know you were kind of creeped out by movies and stuff like that, so it's kind of interesting that you're doing a horror comic book. So what inspired the story? I know that it's a huge mystery, so basically maybe just give us the elevator pitch so we know what the story is about, and then tell us like how you thought of it, like, and why you wanted to do it.
I mean, well, the elevator pitch is that it's basically a Jekyll and Hyde, you know, story where you only see the Jekyll part, you know, where he is this person sort of when he falls asleep, he turns into something unthinkably terrible, you know, and ravages the countryside and kills dozens of people. And then he wakes up somewhere else and goes, "Oh God, what's happened?" And so, I mean, I had this idea years ago, and it mainly, I mean, a lot of details have changed. I mean, I think it was probably a werewolf story at one point, and so I liked the idea of one, I don't really I like drawing sort of like aftermath of stuff, and I think it's kind of fun to sort of like piece together what's going on with that, and I like when you are given so little information in a story that you are hungry for it. You know that you're like, oh, I'm looking for clues because you know sometimes when people are explaining everything in a story, you're kind of like, yeah, all right, you know. You know, you kind of tune out because you're like, well, you'll tell me if it's important, you know, like, but I kind of like the idea where it's like, okay, I'm not giving you very much, and so you have to kind of look in the background, and that's kind of how this red, you know, there's a red details in the background that are kind of counterintuitive. Like, you know, you think, oh, it's a black and white or a black, white, and gray comic, and with red, oh, it must be the blood. Well, it's like it's not the blood. It's just details in the background, little objects and stuff, and they all have this meaning, but it's one of those things where it's like it's not obvious, and it's kind of one of those things where you need a couple issues to sort of start to see patterns and stuff. So that to me is like, okay, well, if I'm not going to give you much in the sort of storyline, I can at least give you a lot in the background, even if you don't know what you're getting yet. And so yeah, and again, it's like that it didn't I like horror now. I mean, I'm, you know, as an adult, but like I think what I liked about it was more like it was a mystery and more that it was something where you're your viewpoint is severely limited.
We've set off something in me that I didn't know existed. I'm becoming like the super sleuth. I'm like looking for details. I'm looking for like any little clue that probably isn't a clue. Um,
Right.
and I'm glad you said it because this was my guess, and I feel like I thought it. I feel like it's a werewolf story, but clearly it's not. And I feel like the character thinks he's a werewolf too at this point because he keeps waking up and like there's like. But then I thought there might be an alien angle here too because the whole slaughtered livestock
Oh,
sort of
right, right.
angle. So I don't know for
Yeah.
sure, but while we figure this all out, and even like when I read the recap, I'm like Jonathan Reason. I'm like, is there a reason his name is Reason?
Well, I don't know.
Perhaps there is, and then of course there's the part of the freak part of me that wants them all to be part of this cult of Sally Jesse Raphael, and that's why they wear red glasses, and
That's right.
they've been, like he's becoming Sally Jesse Raphael at night and
Yeah. Well,
killing people.
I know, just to carry her on her tradition, like she was always killing people at night. So yeah,
Exactly.
it was funny when you said that in the review. Where I was like, that never occurred to me. I guess.
Well, it's true. I have a weird brain, so don't.
Right.
It's true. That would be the only comparison you'll
Yeah,
ever
yeah,
get. Trust me. Um, but I love it. It's such a great story. It takes place like in a small town. It's modern times, right?
no, it's well, there's
Because it
somebody's
feels
writing a check.
90s, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Oh, okay.
90s. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
So
And
somebody's writing a check and it says 1996, and it was just kind of arbitrary. I just wanted to be pre-cell phone, because
that's what
we'd be solving problems left and right if we had cell phones.
yes. No, that's my whole point. Like horror doesn't work in modern times. Technology has ruined horror films for sure.
Or it requires so much setup. Which like, why isn't my technology working? Am I out of, like we can't even really plausibly say, oh, you're, like there's no cell network because it's like, it's everywhere now. So you have to be like, something's affecting the cell phones. And it's like, all right, I'll just set it 30 years ago and we'll be all set.
So, and you talk about your simple cartoon style, but your art is like gorgeous. I love the art. Like the aesthetic is so cool here because it's black and white. However, the tones and like the effects you're doing and like the lighting gives it like this depth. And plus the pops of red throughout are like totally fun. And you said that you're working like on all kinds of crazy like old Photoshop or old programs
Yeah,
and
that's
just
right.
like torturing yourself like that. So
Oh,
what inspired in like hand lettering on the screen, which I have to say, I adore your digital hand lettering and your use of onomatopoeia is off the chain, especially in the coffee shop with the sh and the
oh yeah.
like they just really come alive.
Well, yeah, and I worked at a coffee shop. I had, it's like so I knew the whole process of break, of like closing up and yeah. But yeah, like there's no secret behind why I'm working on old stuff. It's like I'm a cheapskate and it's like Photoshop you have to pay monthly now and it's like forget that. I don't even really like it enough that I would want to pay for it, but I have it, so I'm like, well, I'll just use it, and it's fine. But I mean, it's honestly a 20-year-old version. And I mean, and people are like, you should upgrade to Windows 11. And I'm like, never, because I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if my old stuff's going to work on this. So yeah, I talked with a guy who worked at Microsoft the other day, and he just gave me no end of crap about like because I would just sort of go in like, oh, and I use this old thing and this old thing and this old thing and this old thing, and it just you could watch the color drain out of his face, like it was unthinkable to him, and I'm like, I don't know. It still works. You're the ones.
Yeah.
You're the ones who made Windows backwards compatible, I guess. So like, it's your fault.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I would whatever you're doing is working because it looks really amazing.
That's right.
We have there's like fun characters. There's like the teacher, or she used to be a teacher. She now owns the coffee shop where Jonathan works. And there's this rebel type character who like left to pursue his dreams of becoming a musician, and he comes back that just so happens to coincide with all the chaos that's going on. So clearly he's involved somehow. I know you can't tell us anything, but what can you tell
Well,
us?
well, I think it's really fun. I mean, I think it's really fun to kind of come up with characters that are like not everything that they do or say is going to be plot related. A lot of it is just sort of like, it's like, I mean, people have sort of talked about Twin Peaks, and it's like I liked how everybody sort of had a little, little quirks about them. It didn't really, it sometimes made them suspicious, like in Twin Peaks. It makes them suspicious, but it's also like, well, it's kind of just an interesting, you know, person. Like, and they're kind of based on, like, certain aspects are based on friends of mine or whatever. Like, the guy leaving his band, and it's like, well, yeah, it's like I had a friend who was sort of like, on a band that was going somewhere, but then he kind of, things there was like problems with, like, personalities and stuff like that, and he left the band, and it's like, and it's different. I mean, it's like, oh, a character might be kind of like mean-spirited, but they're kind of based on a person I know who's really nice, but just sort of like based on their art, like their style and their, like, the particulars of their job. Like, um, my wife's a high school teacher, and so, like, she's not like this person who used to be a high school teacher, but,
I
like,
hope
you
not.
know, I know, yeah, she's kind of awful.
She
Yeah, and
is.
so, and then, like, yeah, again, it's like, and Jonathan, in a way, is like me when I was 22, where I was kind of a square, and, like, I kind of was just sort of like floating along, and, trying to figure things out, and, like, um, I really, I don't know. It's fun to kind of come up with characters, and have their lives and their interactions and their sort of like arcs be a little bit disengaged from the mechanisms of the plot and the mechanisms of sort of the horror story. Because, it's like, well, they're all living their lives, and I want to sort of make you feel like this is a sort of a fleshed out town, that they're not all completely focused on this, even, and I mean, until they all have to be, because it's taken on such a, like a scale that they have to. But, yeah, I it was fun to go from Kaiju Max, where everybody is, in a way, everybody is kind of an archetype, and everybody is sort of like an over the top sort of like caricature of a character, and go to people who are like, oh no, this person really, like, I have to kind of really make it clear, like, okay, this person's a scientist, she works at a lab, she does this and she does this, and she lives in town, and she has a car, and, like, all the little things that are like kind of real life stuff. That was kind of fun to do, after all these years of doing kind of what is essentially fantasy, fantasy or science fiction stuff.
Yeah, I think it's good. Like, I mean, I feel like the characters are like really good and likable, and I like that because I find like in a lot of horrors, the characters are so unlikable that you just can't wait till they die anyway. And but and they are good and fleshed out. You can't help but cull from your real life and put, personalities of people. And I feel like reading them, like, definitely a lot of the characters feel like, oh, I know that person, or you know what I mean. That's so it's relatable in that regard. So I like how you're developing the cast. How long, like, do you, obviously you know the mystery. So how much of a slow burn is this? I feel like we can only go for so long before he doesn't know what's happening.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, yeah. Well, the reason that the first issue is slow, and I agree that it is. I mean, I
No,
was
a
really,
slow burn in a good way. I'm like eating my
yeah.
popcorn.
Well, and that was the thing. It's like, well, I wanted to really make sure, like, okay, well, every issue is going to be essentially one day. I mean, it changes later, but, like, it's one waking period. And so I kind of felt like, oh, okay, well, I can't really sort of like get into the premise, which is, which one is like, oh yeah, he turns into something else when he falls asleep, and two, that the next day he's somewhere else. I can't really get into that in the first issue, because definitionally I've only, or at least what I've set up for myself, I have to have it be one full day. And so, yeah, and so again, it's like, that's where all the, like, clues come in, and that's where sort of like the men, like, I feel like I've tried to put like a sense of menace into even sort of like these sort of daily interactions. But yeah, like, it's only 8 issues, and so the I promise. I mean, the second issue, there's immediately things that start to happen in the third issue and the fourth issue. I'm just finishing inking the fourth issue, and I'm penciling the. I'm sorry, I've just finished inking the third issue, and I'm penciling the fourth issue, and it's, yeah, I mean, I'm drawing, and I'm like, God, this is so awful. Like, this is so gruesome, and so, like, upsetting, that I kind of am like, all right, well, I hope that they don't get too mad at me about this. You know what I mean? I mean, people don't. It's a horror book. What are you going to do? But, like, it is funny where I was just like, oh yeah, this, in my head, this was just sort of like chess pieces moving around. And then when you draw it, and draw someone with tears streaming down their face, and, like, having to make a terrible decision, you're like, ugh.
Isn't it funny how the story, it's funny because you always hear that writers say that the characters started writing themselves, and they really do. I mean,
Yeah,
some character stories can definitely take you in different directions. In a way, I kind of thought it was an ongoing series, so in a way, I'm sad, but I'm also kind of relieved to know
right.
that it's only 8 issues because I don't know how much I can take of this. It's like kind of like it's definitely keeping me on the edge of my seat. Like I really want to know what's happening. I really want
Yeah.
to
Well,
know.
thank you. That's all. I mean, in a way, it's like that's the only thing I care about is that people would keep turning the pages. You know what I mean? Like you could be like, oh, I want it to be good, and I want it to be like, like say something, and I want it to. But really, it's like that's the hardest thing is to make people want to know, is to make people want to know what happens and have them keep turning the pages. That's the hardest thing to do.
And
Uh,
pissing people off, I think, is like the best possible outcome because it shows how invested they are, right?
yeah. I mean, pissing people off maybe or just surprising people. I try not to piss people off, but you never know.
I know because
Well, it's funny because when the cat, there's like this, there's a thing in the first issue where you're like, oh God, poor Mittens or whatever. I got a bunch of people like kind of bitching me out about, dude, is the cat dead? I don't think I can read anymore if the cat's dead. I'm like, take it easy, you guys. You didn't ever see the cat. Like it's just been suggested.
Yeah, I know now. Like all these things are shooting off in my brain. I know, actually, yeah, that is it's a brave, bold move as an auteur to hurt the animals.
I know because people, yeah, people get so mad about it, and it's like, you're right, you're right, you're right.
And now you say casually as that he turns into this thing at night, but it could be something completely different, right? We don't know.
Well,
Or
I mean,
does.
I welcome all, in my letters page, I have the conspiracy corner, and I welcome all theories, and I guess I sort of feel like the premise is when he falls asleep, he turns into something else, and you know I mean, that is what I am doing. It is him, like, but and it's because I really wanted to sort of say like, well, let's again, it's like sometimes, when you see so many movies about where people do irrational and like foolish things in a horror scenario, I kind of wanted to have something where someone is like, is a little bit stressed out, but is thinking fairly clearly about it. Like, okay, well, I need to figure out what to do about this. Like I need to really quickly, start to figure out what to do, and I need some help, and I need some, I wanted it to be more about navigating a very familiar scenario than it was about like trying to fool everybody into like, with a bunch of like potential scenarios. But
Mhm.
uh, but again, it's like I welcome all
Either way,
all theories.
either way, you'll never look at your barista the same way again.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Do not take a nap in the back room.
I like that, like he's such a nerd and like such a nice, good person that like he's like screaming from the top of his lungs, like, look at me, pick me, pick me, pick me. And they're like, no, 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 no. It's like it's not you.
Well, I think, and it's funny because some people are like, oh, he doesn't seem to have a lot of like edge to him, or like what I'm surprised that he doesn't have like a more darker side. And I'm like, I kind of felt like that was necessary to sort of say like, this is a person who really has tried to be good his whole life, and now it's been taken out of his hands, like, and I think
I
that's
know.
it's kind of
I know
an interesting thing.
it's super interesting because then it's like all the moral, questions and what is he doing, like now I'm looking for clues like what is happening to him, if there's something in his past that led up to this, was this his fate all along, all this will be answered, all this will be answered.
Well, yeah, and I mean one of the fun things, one of the exhausting things, but one of the fun things is like when Image publishes you're kind of, they're basically like, all right, you get a 32-page book with four covers, basically in front, back, inside back, and then 32 pages on the inside, and you got to fill it up. And so you could do 32 pages of comic if you want to. You really are meant to do 22, but there's room to sort of breathe, and then there's letter pages and ads and stuff like that. But like, it's like I got to do the inside front cover, and it's like it's sort of stressful. So I kind of figure out this way to do it that I can just add a little bit each time. Same thing with the covers. Like the covers have a very sort of like um, a style that I'm sort of sticking to pretty closely for the first five anyway, and then I and so it's interesting when you're given so much control, which is stressful, but it's also like, oh, okay, well, I have to sort of figure out something that will sort of like be kind of cool in like when you add it all up. Like, in
Hmm.
aggregate, you'll kind of go like, oh, look at all these covers, or oh, look at all these inside front covers, and look at all the information that changes, or stuff like that. So I think that that's kind of a fun thing. In a world where comics are kind of always jumping out at you, I wanted to have something that kind of says that beckons you in and say, well, you got to look pretty closely. There's not a lot like, you know, nobody's blood is splurting all over the place. It's more like you kind of have to look around for the awfulness and for the clues and stuff. So
Yes. Did you digitally hand draw the logo?
yeah,
Yeah.
in fact that logo was a placeholder. I was just doing for that for the proposal, and I thought I'll get back to it. I'll do something that's better. And then I'm like, no, it's good. It's pretty.
Sometimes the first swipe is the best, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, like what I wanted to do was go back and do something that was a little bit finer, like with a smaller brush pen point. But then I thought I kind of like how bold it is, and I played with it, and I put that sort of like that sort of white drop shadow, which I think helped give it some pop, you
Hmm.
know, and yeah.
And was I right as the inside front cover, your homage to the Family Circus?
I mean, it crossed my mind for sure. Like yeah, I do like. I mean, when I was drawing it, I was kind of like under the gun, like a deadline wise, and I was like, oh gosh, drawing this stupid town, and I didn't really like it until then I saw it in print, and I was like, oh no, it's fine. Like it's good. Like it's funny because it's like you get so close in, and you're like, it's not looking that great. And then and then you kind of take it at a distance and you're like, that's pretty all right. So
No, my other question, and it's a stupid one. The letters column for the first page, there's a letter from Mark W. That has to be Mark Wade, right?
it is it is Mark Way. Just
I
not to
mean,
out him. I mean, I was hiding it only, he didn't ask me to. I just was being funny, like, the
no,
way they used to on old comic book pages.
no, no, no. It's funny you should say that because I've been reading a lot of these like facsimile editions from the Silver Age, and like
Yeah.
it's so charming and so great. And I immediately thought of that when I saw that from Mark W. And I had to ask because I thought, of course, it's fun. Like, who are you gonna like? You want to get like opinions and stuff, so of course you're gonna send it to your pro
Right.
friends. And
Right.
I just
And I'm
thought
like,
it.
please, please, please just give me a crackpot theory. I'm dying for it.
I loved it. I thought it was really great. So, the letters column is traditionally always one of the most fun parts of a comic book. So I'm glad that you're using that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of sort of, like time and all that stuff and the fact that people kind of do the essentially the same thing on like sort of an Ask Me Anything on Twitter or, Blue Sky or whatever. But I really like a letters page. It's like, I guess I just remember coming home from the comic store with a stack of comics and you're like, you read them all through pretty quick. And then you're like, well, what else you got? And it's always kind of fun to, and a lot of times they just end up being like frequently asked questions and sort of like, oh, here's a thought I had, or here's a bit of advice or uh stuff like that. I don't know. I feel like it's free because I just will talk about anything for however long. It's basically free content because it's just like, all right, I'll ask myself a question and then I'll answer
I love it.
it.
So if I were to do a screenshot and zoom in on the whiteboard behind you with all those post-its,
Oh, yeah.
would that reveal to me the answers to sleep?
You'd certainly have like the beginnings and ends of certain issues spoiled for you, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think one thing that's funny is like all the stuff is yeah, like the pink columns there. It's like that was the stuff that I figured out like right away, which is like, oh, this is how each issue starts and ends. With the implication of like what's in between is sort of like the surprise. And then it's like everything after that, it's like it changes all the time. I mean, as I'll draw a character, I'll be like, oh, this character's more interesting than I thought. I think I'm gonna give her sort of like this philosophy to sort of like weave into the story when these people are meeting, or oh, I'm gonna sort of kill off this character earlier. I'm gonna keep this character around later, and like that kind of stuff. Um, because again, it's because this town is so small, the story is so sort of loose, and the plot really only progresses at night. Like it kind of only the mechanisms of the plot really only progress in the overnights, and so all the other stuff is character business and is sort of like philosophy and thinking and sort of like trying to get ahead of things and interactions and sort of building characters relationships and stuff. And so it's kind of fun how loose that can be in this very tight framework.
So, and I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but will it follow the same formula throughout, or will we ever get to see what happens at night?
There will be something that happens towards the end that is more, it is more revealing than what we've seen, than the sort of stuff that we'll see up through 5 issues or so. But I mean, I'm sticking to things fairly closely because I like the idea of like setting up a premise and sticking to it. And I think that in comics, I feel like that I wouldn't say it's rare, but I think that sometimes in comics that the there's so much of a sort of a temptation to sort of like add on to sort of add,
Hmm.
to sort of like kind of double up the premise or sort of say like, oh yeah, well, this is about time travel, but I mean, what if we put vampires in it too? And it's like, no, this is just about this one thing, and I'm trying to sort of like have new stuff happen within that framework every time. But like the plot will demand a certain amount of revealing towards the end, and B, it's like uh I don't want people to feel like they're getting their money's worth, right? Like I feel like the story will conclude itself in a way that is sort of answers all the questions and sort of plays out all of the scenarios. And
I feel like there's a huge clue in the second issue, but I'm not going to get into details because I don't want to spoil it. But because one of the characters makes a reference to they see something in red and everyone else sees it in black.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I was like, there is something there. I'm holding on to that for dear life because that needs to be explained right there. And I feel
right,
like it's going to be part of it. So where
yeah.
are you? Obviously issues 2 is finished because you let me see that. But out of 8 issues, what issue are you working on currently?
Well, I'm just finishing inking number 3. I gotta do all the tones and all that stuff, but and I'm probably 3 or 4 pages into penciling number 4. There will probably be like an extra month in there somewhere that where I got to catch up because it is kind of a one guy show, and it's really can be tough. Um, but especially since I think that the last 2 issues are going to be, I don't think they're going to be longer than 32 pages, but they may be close to 32 pages as
Hmm.
opposed to being closer to 22 pages.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and so there's a lot of I always wish that I would be like the guy who's like, man, I'm on top of it. I can get every single thing done at the deadline, but I am better at least knowing how long things are going to take.
Well, you seem pretty proficient, I would say so. So it looks good, looks good.
And the funny thing is, once there's just penciling, inking, lettering, and coloring to do, I'm like, this is a breeze. Like this is a snap. That's all the easy stuff. And
Are
I
you are you
like
taking it issue by issue? Like you haven't written the final issue yet, have you?
I never really write it. I mean, I'll have a lot of stuff plotted out, and I think that it fleshes out as I go and go like, all right, I just set this up. I want to answer it in that issue, you know, and I'll do that. But I honestly will just sort of like I'll put out the issue, and I've got like 22 pages sort of set out, and I'll kind of make notes and say, by this point, I want this to happen, and by this point, I want this to happen. This is sometimes I'll be like, I know exactly how the last couple pages are going to go, so I just do that. And that's kind of nice because if you have a good start and then a good finish, and you kind of go, oh, there's only 6 pages left in the middle, that kind of like gives you a sense for like the scale of what you can attempt for that. You know, and sometimes you're like, oh, well, maybe I can bump it up to 7 or something. I mean, I have a pretty organic way of going about writing just because I'm only answerable to myself. I'd be much more detail oriented if I was passing a script off to somebody. But you know, I can just sort of be like, oh yeah, yeah, like that art's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to add an extra page, you know, to sort of get something else in it. I mean, there's in the third issue, I just added this extra page that I didn't plan on being in there at all, you know, and it just you
Yeah.
know, it made it a lot better. So
Yeah, I was going to say, is there any chance of like something coming up to throw off the trajectory of the story? Like, has that ever happened to where you're like, oh gosh, now I have to like figure something else out or do something else a little differently because I didn't expect this to happen or something like that?
nothing that drastic. I mean, the forces against me doing any more work are powerful. Like I, I would resist that with every fiber of my being. I mean, one, because I am a little bit lazy, but two, I have an immediate project that I have to start. Like I have to start a kid's book right after this horrifying like horror book. You
It'll be
know,
a good palate cleanser for
it
your soul.
really will. And they're like, oh, my little mouse and toad friends, you know, like I think that's going to be really fun. But it's like, but that's all already that book has been pushed back twice so that I could do this. And so I'm like, oh no, I can't do anything extra for this series. So
Well, that was going to be my next and final question. If you had anything else coming out that you had already worked on, or if you had already had plans for your next project. So I guess we know that you're working on a children's book next. Anything else in the ether?
yeah, well, it's a children's book. It's like a YA sort of like, you know, kid. It's YA between YA and middle grade, and it's just you know, it's a kid's adventure with called Vermin Quest about a mouse and a toad and a cockroach who are friends or allies anyway. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, then after that, you know, Image, you know, Image is a good place to go. I've got a science fiction story that I've been sort of like that's been percolating. I've got a superhero story that's all of my rejected DC pitches that I've kind of crammed all into one like 300 page you know, novel that's like it's a widescreen, not widescreen, but you know, it's like a landscape mode. Anyway, it's pretty fun. It's called Golden Wing. I've just been picking away at it for like 10 years.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so cool. I would love to see that come about.
Yeah,
Um, well, I know you're busy, and I appreciate you taking your time to talk to me
absolutely.
today. And it was so fun to like get to hear the behind the scenes stuff of my new favorite mystery. It's so good, you guys. You have to go out and get it. Do not sleep on Sleep. It is amazing.
I
It is
see
so
what you
much
did there.
fun. And it has, I'm the pun master, so forgive me. Has nothing to, unfortunately, it has nothing to do with Sally Jesse Raphael, but it is amazing otherwise. From the Eisner winning, yes, artist of top 10 Kaiju Max. Heck, now I gotta look up Heck. I that sounds fun too. That's the other book you worked on.
Yeah, that's sort of the first one in this sort of like this stage of my career. Like that was sort of what kicked off like this sort of like this period of time where I do like absurd but sad graphic novels. That's that was the first one of that sort of like sort of stage of my career.
And I will happily purchase and review every single issue of Sleep. But if you want to keep
Nice.
sending me advanced previews, please keep on, and I'll
All right.
happily write my Mark W. fan letter for you.
There we go. There we go. I can't wait.
All right,
All
Xander. Well,
right.
congratulations on Sleep. It is amazing. It is
Thanks, man.
just so cool and fun and refreshing, like a good break from superhero comics that I love so much.
Yeah.
So I urge everyone to go out and get it. Thanks so much for talking us to do me today. Subscribe to my channel, everyone, if you haven't already. Pick up Sleep, and I will talk to you later. Thanks, Xander.